And that's the point, isn't it? That's the point. We can wreck, we can damage the City of London in no time at all with bad European regulation, but once a piece of European law becomes British law, there is nothing that the British electorate can do at any subsequent general election, regardless of which government they vote for, to change that law in any way at all. And that gets right to the heart, not just of what the threat to the City of London is, but it gets to the very heart of the threat to the very nature of democracy and self-government in this country. And the reason that after 20 years of lunching at Simpson's in the Strand, I've gone into the City of London to eat taxpayer-funded foie gras in Strasbourg, I suppose. But the reason that I've got into politics is I find it totally unacceptable that laws can be made by which we have to live and by which businesses have to abide. I find it unacceptable that those laws cannot be changed by any subsequent British government if we were to vote them in. I mean, think about it. Think about it. Older and wiser heads here will remember what things were like in the 1970s. But by voting in Mrs. Thatcher in 1979, the country changed, didn't it? We changed the country by voting for a different government, and income tax for all you greedy, nasty capitalists in the city came down. If, from you remember, it was 83%, wasn't it? Top rate income tax was 83%, and within a few years of the Thatcher government, it had come down to 40%. So that is at the heart of this problem. And so what I am trying to do, Mr. Chairman, over the course of the next 3.5 weeks, as we run up to the European elections, is I am trying to engage this country as much as I humanly can, and try to engage our three big party leaders in a proper, full national debate about who makes our laws and about are they directly and democratically accountable to us. I've talked about finance, but of course this spills over to other areas of our life. One of the areas that most concerns people, I think, in Britain today is the whole question of immigration and asylum. You know, it's not that, and please believe me, of the 69 candidates that we're putting up for the European elections, and that's the complete list, in England, Scotland and Wales, you know, we've got 5 of our candidates are black and Asian candidates, people who were born abroad, who've come to Britain, been damn successful, and believe in exactly the values that UKIP believes in. We are approaching this from an entirely non-racist and non-sectarian perspective, but we believe that the sheer irresponsibility of having an open-door policy to the whole of Eastern Europe is mad. Yeah. Absolutely mad. And I remember that vote. That vote took place in Strasbourg in early 2004. That debate, Mr. Chairman, wasn't even had on the floor of the House of Commons. The House of Commons did not even debate opening the door to the whole of Eastern Europe. And I remember at the time that I said it seemed to me obvious that if you had an open door policy to countries that were very much poorer than the countries in the West, that inevitably it would lead to a huge migratory flow. Now, the Home Secretary at the time, David Blunkett, said that it would lead only to an extra 13,000 people a year coming into Britain. It was 500,000 in the first year alone. I suspect that David Blunkett was somewhat distracted by his very active social life at the time. I'm only jealous. So we've had this massive migratory flow. We continue to have an open door. But the madness doesn't stop here. Because Clegg, Cameron and Brown, they're not happy even with the medieval peasant economies like Romania and Bulgaria joining the European Union, and incidentally being able to vote on how the City of London runs its own businesses. No, we want to go further than that. We even now want to take into our union a country, 98% of which is landmass is in Asia, namely Turkey. And have a total open door to Turkey. It is madness, and let me give you an example of why it's madness. 3 weeks ago, the Romanian Prime Minister, I'll correct that, the Romanian President, 3 weeks ago, granted 1 million new passports to people from Moldova. Moldova is the poorest country by far in the entire European time zone. That means that those 1 million people, if they wish, can all come to the United Kingdom. I think it is totally unacceptable that a Romanian president can decide who comes to live, work and settle in this country. I believe those decisions, just as I believe how we run our financial services, should be made by the British people through their own parliament, who are directly accountable to them. It's amazing, isn't it? Nick invites you as a guest and you get still tap water. I'm sure we'll sort that out. There's a far fellow there. He's really pushed the boat out, hasn't he? My goodness. So once again, I want to engage those three big party leaders in this debate, knowing full well they would rather not discuss this, knowing full well they'd rather the great British public didn't actually know the truth about these things. And I am saying to people, use these elections on June the 4th. Recognise that we're not voting for who gets the key to the door to number 10, that we're voting in a European election, and so we should vote on European questions. We should vote on where 75% of our laws are made. We should vote deciding whether we think a £40 million a day bill to an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off for 14 years in a row is actually something we ought to do. So they're the kind of debates that we're going to try and have. And I'm going to be the lead candidate in the South East with some city experience and with some pretty considerable political experience. But we've got a very good team of people standing for UKIP in these elections, and I'll just introduce you briefly to the number 2 candidate in the South East. Do you remember when the entire European Commission had to resign in disgrace back in 1999? Fraud, waste, mismanagement and nepotism. That's what it was all about. And in fact the story was that the nepotism had got so bad that they discovered that the French commissioner, it's always French, it's funny, isn't it? The French commissioner, Edith Cresson, had even appointed her dentist to an £86,000 a year job in the European Commission. Of course, what we didn't know then, but do now, is that he was her live-in dentist. Anyway, nonetheless, the entire Commission was booted out, and we were told, don't worry, it's all going to be sorted out. We're going to find a wonderful new team of commissioners that are going to clear the whole thing up. And the man they put in charge of doing all of this was an Italian called Romano Prodi, who was known in the Italian press as the greasy sausage, and who himself had 3 times been investigated for fraud by the Italian government. But we were told, even if he's not the full 9 yards, we've got a really wonderful chap who's going to become the Commission Vice President, and his job will be to sort out fraud, waste, mismanagement and corruption within the Commission. And they chose that great giant of late 20th century British politics. Yes, I'm talking about the boyo from the valleys, Neil Kinnock. The man who even managed to lose a general election to John Major, and my God, that took some doing. And so, Kinnock was put in charge of cleaning the whole thing up and reforming it, and for the first time in their history, believe it or not, they actually appointed somebody to be the chief accountant to the Commission who was qualified as an accountant. It had never happened before. So Marta Andreasen was appointed with a budget of 100 billion euros a year, and a couple of years into this, clearly there was no real attempt at reform of any kind at all, and Mr. Kinnock clearly wasn't listening, and she decided that she could keep quiet no longer, and she became known as the whistleblower. She said she's not a whistleblower, and her name, if you remember, was Marta Andreasen, and I'm very pleased to say, and stand up Marta please, this is the lady who did her best. This is the lady who did her absolute best to try and clean the whole thing up, and found that it was so badly constructed that it was incapable of reform, and I'm very pleased and proud